Friends, welcome back to week 5. I really can't believe we're here already. But week 5 of the Three Rivers Pantry Challenge. We're going to have a steak night, make some pizza bread, some monkey bread with the littles, and teach this one how to crack eggs. So if that's interesting to you, hang out because we're about to have some fun. Just a little housekeeping. Before we get started on the steak night, I want you to know that I have a new camera I'm working with a little bit later this week, and I want you guys to let me know how you feel about the footage that comes in a little bit later when I'm using a 2-camera setup. Additionally, I have an awesome new addition to my kitchen. I'll show you it a little later. There's a discount code to follow, and it's a really great deal. Now, on to the steak. So in the middle of prepping the steak, I had a little helper come down from her nap crying. So you just saw me take a break to take care of her, which is definitely real life around here. So I hope you guys can appreciate that. Now I just finished breaking up some garlic and getting it ready, and I am still holding her, trying to throw these steaks out with one hand, which is, again, just a constant mom trick to get things done while keeping little sad ones happy. So we're putting this steak out. I have 4 T-bones to go for the night, getting them dry to make sure to get them really heavily salt and peppered on one side. I also have some cast iron skillets over on the stove getting super hot, and I will put this side that I've seasoned face down, and then once they're in the pan, I'll move on to doing the same thing for the opposite side. Now for me, I'm just going to have the steak along with the pan sauce you're going to see me make in just a little bit, but for the kids, they're getting these delicious garden potatoes that I still had. I actually froze these this year, and the kids have liked them so far. They're not quite the same texture as they are straight out of the garden and fresh, but I find that they actually cook up a little bit faster because they're softer just from the freezing process. So I put these on a skillet, added a little bit of oil. There's also some bacon grease there, and I'm also stirring around these onions to make sure everything gets nice and coated and onto the bottom of the pan before throwing them back in the oven to finish their cook time. Now here's those steaks I was mentioning face down, getting that nice sear on them. They're going to go for about 2 minutes on each side. I'm doing a little bit of finagling to get that last one in there, but you know, it is what it is when you're feeding this many people. I probably should have got out a 3rd skillet, but I just wasn't in the mood at this point. So got them all in the 3. We're giving them a good salt and pepper, and then once they have 2 minutes on that side, I'm going to flip them over and you'll see the nice browning. Once they're flipped, I basically go ahead and just put them directly in the oven. I don't really need any extra time on that backside because they're going to get plenty of that when they're in the hot oven. We like our steaks, I would say medium to medium rare. We're definitely not a well-done family, and that goes even for the kids. We like them definitely on the pink side to even toward the rare side. So these are only going to be in there for just a few minutes before we pull them straight back out and let them rest for 5 to 10 minutes before getting them cut. Now the potatoes, as you can see here, were not quite finished. They got another toss, and I actually threw some garlic on. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but the garlic is in there roasting as well. I have a couple kids that like to eat the straight cloves of garlic, like me. I love that. So I throw in a few extra of those. Now here's that buttery pan sauce that I was talking about earlier. This has the drippings from the steak itself. Throwing in some butter, and then I'm going to add some heavy cream. Now, I did go spend a few dollars this week. I got a quart of raw cream from a local farmer, and I absolutely love it. We use it in things like this. We also use it in our scrambled eggs sometimes because it makes them extra just fluffy and buttery, and we use it kind of anywhere that would call for milk. The full fat of that is something that I really love as part of the carnivore diet, so here you can see me pouring that in the pan. I'm also going to add some garlic to this, but I'm not going to add anything to thicken it. This is going to cook down for just a few minutes, but all in, it's still going to end up as a pretty runny sauce. And what you just saw me add there was a little bit of beef broth. I meant to add this earlier and totally forgot that I was going to do that. So this adds a little bit more bone broth to the sauce itself. And then I went back to that other little pan because there were some really nice crunchy bits over there, and I'm picking them up just to add that in. I wanted every bit of that flavor that I could possibly get. Now, when I press the garlic in here, you're going to see that it doesn't all initially come out. I get a little bit here, but then when I flip the press over and backwards, I get a little bit more. It's not the actual skin, but it's a little bit too tough to actually just slide through there. So what I do with that is just kind of rip it apart and throw it in, because that is still garlic and it's still delicious. And this made the most amazing pan sauce. My kids actually joked about wanting to just drink it straight, which is pretty true. Now, in weeks past, you've seen me with this corn. At the end of the last week, we had corn again. So I had these 2 ears left. Now, of course, 2 ears is not enough for my family, but this is far from the only thing that we're going to be eating in this meal. So this was a nice little addition for the kids. So I'm cutting these 2 ears into 6 total pieces, and then we'll have that ready to go. I just took these and warmed them up in the air fryer. So it was super easy way to do it, and it still turned out delicious. Again, cutting the corn off for the little one, who did finally this week lose that front tooth. So I don't think I'll have to be doing that anytime soon. Check out that fat. These steaks were pretty fatty, so I did go ahead and cut off some of those chunks. We can save those for later, and sometimes we air fry them and they are delicious. But sometimes my boys come over and just grab them for a fat snack, which is so healthy for the brain, and the body just craves fat. So if you are continuously hungry or have kids that are hungry, a fat snack like that, an air fried piece of actual beef fat is really good. Butter is great. I actually do that often. But here you can see me fixing my plate, and then I have chopped up steak over on the board for the kids. So my plate's getting some onions, some of that beautiful garlic, and then the pan sauce all over the top. And I did eat that whole thing. I was thinking I wouldn't get all the way through, but push through, get the job done. So here we are at another meal. This is the prep for a sourdough pizza crust. This is a King Arthur recipe. I really find great results with anything I get from them. Love to use them anytime I can. And I'm using the lid to my mixer bowl to weigh that out over on the scale. I used a jar to lift it up a little bit just so I could read the numbers easier, but that's totally not necessary. Now, we are mixing this up, getting it on the mixer, and of course, somebody thinks they're ready to help, but I just didn't know if she was going to be using the right buttons. Now, see, she's trying to show you her beautiful pink pencil that goes with her writing pad. She is such a little ham for the camera, so it's always funny to see what she comes up with when I don't really know what she's doing because my back's a little bit to the camera. So at this point, we're getting all of the ingredients into the mixer. This crust is going to ferment for a couple hours before we go ahead and make it. Now, typically, our recent one has been the Detroit style pizza from King Arthur as well, but that is not sourdough. So now that we have the mixer, we're giving it a go, now that we have our starter back, we're giving it a go, and the sourdough crust turned out really great, and everybody was really, really happy with it. Now, I have received several questions regarding my mixer. So I'll tell you, it is an Ankerstrom Assistant. I can do 4 loaves of bread in it really easily. It's wonderful for dough. The roller itself is made to mimic actual hand kneading. So that is the reason that I grabbed this machine. I knew with a family the size of mine, I was going to be putting a lot through it. And the KitchenAid that I had before just was not keeping up anymore. So I will put the link down in the comments if anybody has questions about it. There's all sorts of attachments just like the KitchenAid series, and it is an absolute workhorse. So if you do larger batches or looking for something that you can invest in that you know will last long term, it is a Swedish company and has decades of great experience behind it. So while we're in here, we're going ahead and filling up our sourdough. So I'm going to go ahead and feed the starter now that I took so many cups out to actually make the recipe itself. And then I just slid the lid right on the dough, so it will go ahead and proof right there in the bowl. Now here we are. You can see just how much it rose. That was a lot. This was 3 crusts. And typically we'll make 2, but because my little guy there in the blue shirt had his mind on making his own recipe, we actually went and made a 3rd because he'd been cruising through his kid's recipe book and found an awesome recipe for monkey bread that he had never made before, but he really wanted to try. And it was a big jump for him because this was rated as a level 3 recipe, or one that you needed to have a little more experience to complete. So he was super happy to find something that was going to test his skill level and give him a little bit of a challenge. Typically, monkey bread isn't something that we have around the house, so he was super excited to be able to test it out. And since we already had pizza dough going, it was a perfect fit. One thing I did do to accommodate was I left out the Italian seasoning, which we usually add in our pizza, to go ahead and make it a plain dough so that he could use the flavors and not have anything overwhelming for his monkey bread. Now, here you see me separating out the dough. I'm just cutting it into 3, eyeballing it to begin with, and then I did go ahead and measure just to make sure that everything was going to come out pretty even, for the sake of making sure that the crust actually fully covered my pan. In the past, I'm known to just eyeball it and forget the scale, and then I'll have one that's slightly too small for the pan, and I get a little conversation back about that. So I wanted to go ahead and make sure that these were right. So that's all I'm doing here. If you don't have a scale, I just think they're pretty necessary, to be honest with you. It makes a huge difference, especially if you're baking, to keep everything even. And a lot of recipes are weighed out in grams to make sure everything is more precise than doing cups and teaspoons, tablespoons. So just a great add to have on around your house. Now, to finish my 2 crusts, I just put a drizzle of olive oil on the pan and then go ahead and just throw the dough down. I usually do flip it over a time or two to make sure that there's oil all over. And the reason I do that is because I put plastic wrap on top. And when I put oil on the top of the dough itself, I find that it works a little bit easier with the plastic wrap. It makes it a little easier to smooth. So the initial press out I do with my hands. And then once I get the wrap on there, I let it set for about 10 to 15 minutes and come back and press it again. You can see what I'm doing there with the wrap. My hands are clean on top to get that done. Now, here we go with the monkey bread, and I can tell you he's going to end up with a little helper. You can see she is down on the floor crying just right now, and I'm getting ready to push the chair up there and get her set. It was so funny to hear him talking to her while they were doing this. Is he told me, he said, "Man, Mom, everything takes a lot longer when she's helping." And I'm like, hello, like, welcome to my life. That is the story that every mom knows. You can do it faster, but the truth is it wouldn't be better. So here we are, and just seeing him teach her and be patient with her and work with her was awesome. Now, again, still on the homeschooling front here, we just finished our fractions unit, so this was great for him. He was supposed to divide his dough out into 36 pieces, and in a minute, he's thinking and counting, and we're going to talk through this. He's coming to get me to ask me exactly what he should do from here. So it was a great opportunity for us to work through a real life word problem, which I find are just the most useful tools. Like when the learning is on paper, they still need to be able to translate it to real life. And so when we are able to bake together and able to make those lessons come alive, and he can see exactly how that's going to work for him in his day-to-day life, it just really cements the process and helps him to understand what's going on. So she danced for a little bit, she watched for a little bit, and now she had to get in the mix. We knew that was going to happen, but she just could not imagine watching him that whole time without grabbing some of those little dough balls and putting them in the butter herself. So they are putting those in the melted butter and then rolling them in a mixture of brown sugar, cinnamon, and nutmeg before putting them in the pans to rise. These will set over on the stove and rise while the pizza is baking. So it was a really nice way to time it out to have a snack or a dessert, I should say, at the end of our pizza meal. There were a few more than would fit in one pan, so we went ahead and did two. They had a few leftovers, but as you can guess, not many. They went really, really well, and the kids were super excited about that. So I think in the future, when I put pizza crust in the freezer, I'll make sure to leave some without the Italian seasoning just to get the flexibility of being able to do something like that. Heading back over to the pizza crust, these get sauced and par baked for about 10 minutes before we actually put the toppings on them. So it's a little different process than the Detroit style that we're used to. One got butter and one got sauce. And then once they are baked, we pull them out and everybody got to putting the toppings on. So this, as you can guess, is a fun family affair. Everybody wants in, and we even got dad in on the mix this week. So the kids always love that. But one thing that happens, as you can probably guess, when you're dealing with all of these toppings and 5 kids with their hands in the mix, it becomes a giant mess. So I'll show you in a minute, but the floor just gets covered in cheese. He's telling me right there just how cold the cheese is. That is part of the huge bulk cheese that I shredded up in the video that I put out last week about perfecting the pantry. So if you're curious on shredded cheese or why that cheese is so cold, check that one out because we freeze it for long term. So you can see cheese on the floor, cheese on the stove, cheese everywhere. But in the end, those looked delicious. Now, here's mine. I had a leftover steak with some butter and that cream sauce that we had just a couple days ago. And while they enjoyed their pizza, I definitely enjoyed that steak, which kept me on track for my carnivore week. Now, the pizza is getting all cut up and everybody is coming in. There's so much action behind me. The kids are getting the table ready and coming over to see when their piece is ready. So this is always a big fun night for everybody, particularly when it has monkey bread over on the stove rising to come in later itself. So everybody was happy. Pizza went great. And we topped this with a little powdered sugar icing, and it turned out really, really good. Now, on to the next morning. This was actually Sunday morning. We got up and we were baking a cake for my husband's birthday. Now, traditionally at our house, we go get cupcakes for birthdays, but since we are in the middle of the pantry challenge, we pulled out one of our favorite cupcake recipes, which is a sourdough chocolate cupcake that is found on the Farmhouse on Boone blog. So head on over there if you want more of the recipe. I'll make sure to link it down below, but it's really, really delicious. So I had fermented the beginning ingredients the night before, and at this point, we're just going ahead and putting together the dry ingredients before we get up and get ready for church. So this is bright and early. Everybody's still in their pajamas and kind of wandering around before we jump up and get ready for church. My son is going ahead and adding the liquid ingredients here. That was some of the milk and cream that we picked up this week. And I am doing my usual measure with the vanilla, which means heavy hand, extra on the vanilla. I'm actually getting ready to start making my own vanilla. I'm going to pick up my beans at my next Azure pickup. So if you're interested in seeing how that process works, you might want to subscribe because I'm going to have content on that coming really soon. I'm just tired of buying vanilla when I know I can make it for much, much cheaper. So here I am adding in that ferment that I made the night before to get started on these cupcakes. And let me just tell you, this one is absolutely worth your time. I know sourdough and sweets don't actually sound like they go together, but just trust me when I tell you, there is not one sad person in my house when these beauties come out. Now, we switched places so my son could go get the cupcake liners. This is a funny one. Last year, we tried to do the same exact thing, and I didn't buy the cupcake holders because I just didn't have them already. So I tried to make my own by pressing my parchment paper circles down in those cups, and it was an absolute disaster. So if last year's pantry challenge taught me one thing, it was definitely that these petal cups are worth having, or it's worth having some sort of cupcake liner. You do not want to try to make your own. I know that seems obvious, but I mean, if it's just folded parchment paper, I was confident in my abilities to get it done. Fail. Total fail. I don't recommend it. These I will drop down below. They're worth having around. We don't use them very often, but they're also great for muffins. And I just use my scoop to go ahead and move the dough over, but it makes a really big difference when you have something like these wrappers, because then you can just easily pull them down or have something easy to take with you on the go. Now, I will say I did not take the time to read specifically about how much goes in each muffin cup. So you will see that I did end up overfilling these. We got a big, luscious cupcake. And then as I was going in to check and see if they were done, I opened the oven and they end up caving in the middle. This is a consistent problem of mine. I would like to say that I learned the lesson the first time, but I absolutely do not. So next time I make these, I'm going to make sure to remember they take the longer amount of time written on the recipe in my kitchen, specifically when I fill them that full. We also had enough left to do a 9x9, and that turns out really, really well. So we put a cream cheese icing on that. This is cream cheese and butter whipped with some powdered sugar and of course some vanilla, because what icing doesn't need vanilla? There's also a pinch of salt to give it a little bit of balance, and it turns out really, really good. And you are about to see me whip this thing on up to high after I get the powdered sugar in here. And I find that the faster I whip it, the lighter and fluffier it becomes, and that's exactly what we were going for. Now, I know there are options to have really fancy, nice, beautiful pastry piping bags to put icing on, but that is just nothing that I've ever invested in. I think about it sometimes, and then I think that I'm going to have to store it in all the little pieces, and for the limited amount of time that we actually would need one, it's just not something that I want to go with. So I always pull out the old trusty, always readily available Ziploc bag, as you're about to see. I like to make sure that I don't have one of those stand and fill ones, because they have kind of a flat bottom to them, which impedes my process. But I take this icing and I'm going to put it inside of a Ziploc. Now, to do this easily, I'm putting the bag itself inside of a mason jar using a wide mouth, and then I can just scrape my spurtle over on the edge to make sure that I get that bag all filled up. And I'm sure many of you have seen this trick before and it's not new, but for those of you who haven't seen this, I just cut the end off of the point end off of the Ziploc. I do this exact same thing when I'm making deviled eggs. So just cut off the point, squeeze it all the way down into the corner that you're trying to go to, and then you can just squirt it out. Now, this is not super fancy, but it does get the job done, and it definitely beats my old method of trying to use some sort of little spreader to get in there. Specifically with the new style of cupcake holders that have that tulip style, it would be an absolute disaster to try to do it any other way. So they turn out really pretty, and they were absolutely delicious. The kids found some candles in the drawer, and we had to make sure to bring Dad in and sing to him before the night was over. My son did make him a birthday card. He loves to do handmade cards and forgot to give it to him for a few days. So that was fun to add in a little bit later. Now, we are on to a new day, and I am making a ton of ground meat. I'm saving some out for just taco meat, and this front pan is going to be my taco soup recipe. This is a family favorite, and the seasonings that go in it are a taco seasoning and also a powdered ranch, which you're seeing me pour in here. If you did not see my Perfecting the Pantry video that I put up earlier this week, I made both of these seasonings specifically for the soup and have the rest of it to sit on the shelf. I also am using my immersion blender to go into a jar of tomatoes that I had over on the shelf. The tomatoes, when I put them in the jar, I don't crush them or anything. I just leave them whole because I don't know how I'm going to use them. But one of my kiddos doesn't like big chunks of tomatoes, so I find that just sticking the stick blender down inside that mason jar is a huge help. I have a KitchenAid and I have the cordless one. I think for my own just use around the stove, having a cordless one works better, but that's totally your option. I do recommend making sure you have a metal stick. Previously, we had one that was plastic, and I was just never comfortable sticking that down into hot food. I am super sensitive about chemicals and toxins. I try everything I can to keep that junk out of my house. We have a family history of having a kiddo that's had some health problems in the past, and I just like to keep everything as toxin free as possible. So for us, that is a big one. So onto this soup. You are seeing some beans going in. I usually just grab whatever I have over on the shelf. I have red, kidney, and black going into this recipe. And then one thing that it also calls for is corn. Now, of course, we have corn at our house, but I didn't have any frozen corn. I was totally out of just like the bags that you buy or process yourself. So I made my own, which you'll see here in a minute. Now, the other thing that I'm adding right there is a tomato sauce. I made a whole bunch of that and it has just turned out really good. It's a nice deep flavor. This is onion powder, or I should say minced onion dried. So it's little chunks. I completely ran out of fresh onions and I did not go to the store to buy any. So since we're on Pantry Challenge land, we're going this route. We used it last night actually, which will not air in this video, but in the next week's video on our pizza or calzones, I should say, for last night. And it really turned out well. The kids are always skeptical when something is dried or preserved, but they were definitely impressed. So last time we got corn, I decided to preserve it in 3 different ways to see which way we like best. One of the ways was what you've been seeing in the past, which is straight in the feed sacks. Another was canning some, which I did really love, and the flexibility of that, which is typically what I put in the soup. But the third way was what you just saw me doing. I had taken off the majority of the husk and vacuum sealed 6 years at a time. That was my least favorite texture when it came out of the freezer. So I'm using it now just to cut it off the cob to add it to recipes like this. We would not want to eat it like that when it comes to a fresh eating like corn on the cob. Now, once the soup comes together, we top it like a chili. So some of my kids like vinegar, some do not. Some like sour cream and cheese, some do not. So just whatever personal preference comes to is exactly what we're doing. Through the Pantry Challenge process, as you might imagine, we are making so much room in our freezers and in our pantry. And what you're seeing now is something that I found buried in the bottom of one of my freezers. It's 3 different pounds of ground sausage that my brother had given me to sample, sorry brother, as part of his new meat packing process. I was supposed to get back to him and tell him which one I love the best, and we did try several, but I forgot that these 3 were still down in there. I hope it's not too late, although I know it is, to tell you guys this was absolutely delicious. So we went ahead and browned up all 3 pounds and kept it frozen in the freezer. My actual plan with that was to can the extra from what we didn't need from the current meal, but it did not work out. Now here is the big reveal of the week. This is a new butter dish. I can't tell you how many times in the last 5 weeks I have watched back this footage and laughed at my butter coming out of the wrapper, thinking about how I know in my mind my mom is thinking I should have a beautiful butter dish for that butter. So I went shopping and I was on Amazon and I carted this sucker multiple times and could not decide if I finally wanted to pull the trigger or not. But I finally did get it. And it goes upside down or right side up, whichever way you want to use it. And it is really, really cool. It's also lead free, which is super important to me and why I ended up with the white Corelle dishes in the first place. And you can see it over here on your left. It has a nice wooden lid to go with it. So it's lead free and it's actually a steal. The normal price on it is $16, but they have a $2 coupon code going. And I actually contacted the company and was able to get an extra 5% off for my viewers. Who knew? So if you're interested in this butter dish, it'll come in under $13.50. And that code will expire February 17th. The code is hometown, all lowercase, and I'll make sure to put the link in the description. But it has 4.5-star reviews, over 14,000 reviews, and it fits larger blocks like the Kerrygold and the Romano butters. So I love that. back to the recipe. The little lady is washing her hands because she just got to crack her first eggs and she was so excited. These are going to be sourdough discard waffles. We love our waffles around here, as I'm sure you know, and finding any way to use up sourdough discard is really great when you go through as much as we do. So again, little light on my measuring. I'm not actually baking here. I'm just kind of baking or making waffles. These turned out great. Everybody loved them. And we were able to put a few in the freezer. So it was a really nice way to get that added up. Now, I also do want to just take note here. This is what I was referring to at the beginning. I have two different cameras going and I'm trying to get some different angles to make sure that you guys are getting the best experience as the viewer. I would love to hear your thoughts if you like switching back and forth or if you prefer just sticking with one and getting a little bit more of consistency in the shot itself. I will say I've learned a lot pulling this out this week. It's been fun to play with and kind of get to see what I can do. And I'm just really looking for a little bit of feedback here to see what you guys think and how you like it. So into the pot, the baking soda goes. Notice, yeah, a little more on the counter than I would love, but that's just part of it. And it's not really that big of a deal. Again, she is so good at stirring, or at least she is in her mind. She did manage to keep it all off of her clothes, which was really great. And we're going to go ahead and get this waffle maker oiled up. And I can tell you guys, after several weeks of owning it, I really love this green pan waffle maker. So if you are in the market for one, make sure to check it out. It is something that doesn't have the nasty nonstick toxins that most of waffle makers actually have in order to make them nonstick. So it is something that I'm comfortable feeding to my family. Celebrate! Kiss, she loves those waffles. There's another good picture of the butter dish, so if you're curious, it does come in a few different colors. Make sure to grab that before the 17th when that code doesn't work any longer. The final meal of this week's video is not quite a full meal. This is just a delicious gravy with some of that sausage that we had browned up the day before. I pulled it out and made sure to get some of the drippings that had kind of gotten solid down in the bottom of the pan in the refrigerator, and then sprinkled on some flour on top, giving that a good stir and cooking it for a bit before adding some of our raw milk that we picked up earlier in the week. I let this cook down, added some salt and pepper, and we let this cook down on the stove until it turned into a really thick, nice, delicious gravy. The kids were super happy with it. One of my sons actually said he thought he could just drink it. So always an option, but we did serve it atop some biscuits for them, which was a rare treat. We actually don't do biscuits and gravy very often, but it was a cold, nasty morning, and they were so excited that we did the sausage the day before. They were confident that this was the perfect way to start our school day. So with that, friends, I want to thank you for hanging out with me for week 5 of this pantry challenge. I really can't believe how fast it's gone, and I'm so excited to have many new faces along for the journey. If you have any questions for me, please drop them below. I am super interested in your feedback, and I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to spend a little time with me in our kitchen with my family. So from our house to yours, thanks again for stopping by, and we'll see you back soon.